case of Isabella Rodriguez. Isabella Rodriguez was born in Colombia in 1975 and moved to Florida with her family in the 1990s. They obtained U.S. residency and eventually citizenship in 2002 when Isabella was 27. She married William Hellman, but they divorced in 2015 after a decade together. Isabella then met Louis Bennett online, and they began a romantic relationship. In 2016, Isabella and Louis had a daughter named Amelia. 6 months later, they purchased an apartment in Delray Beach, a city on Florida's Atlantic coast. They married the following month in February 2017. At the time, Isabella worked as a real estate agent and Louis owned a small solar panel company. On April 30th, 2017, Isabella flew to the Caribbean island of St. Martin to meet Louis, leaving their 9-month-old daughter with relatives. They planned to spend a week on the water, returning home to Florida on Louis's sailing catamaran. After stopping in the British Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, they arrived in Cuba, where they stayed for a few days. On May 14th, the catamaran set sail from Veradero, Cuba, bound for Florida. Isabella called her sister 3 hours later to say she would be home the next day. At around 1 a.m., Louis sent out a distress signal to the U.S. Coast Guard, reporting that his ship had collided with an unknown object and was sinking. He also reported that his wife, Isabella, was missing. A Coast Guard helicopter crew located Louis in a life raft around 4 a.m. and took him to Key West Island, the southernmost part of Florida. The catamaran was found floating upside down at dawn, but had not yet sunk. During an interview with investigators, Louis explained that he and Isabella took turns keeping watch. At the time of the accident, it was Isabella's turn, and Louis was asleep in his stateroom. He woke up to the sound of the collision and rushed on deck, but couldn't find Isabella. He called out her name, but she didn't respond. Louis suspected that the loose mast might have knocked her overboard. Louis also stated that the last time he saw Isabella, she was wearing a life jacket. When he was rescued, a Coast Guard rescue swimmer noticed that Louis's backpack was unusually heavy. Upon inspection, officers found 225 collectible coins in the backpack, but their origin was unclear. Isabella Hellman went missing on May 15th, prompting a 4-day search and rescue operation by the Coast Guard. As no signs of her were found, the operation was officially ended on May 18th. The authorities were suspicious when Louis Bennett, Isabella's husband, requested a letter from the Coast Guard stating that his wife was presumed dead just 24 hours after the search had ended. The Coast Guard denied the request as it was outside their jurisdiction to issue such a certificate. 6 days later, Louis announced on TV that he was traveling to Cuba to rent a boat and continue the search for his wife on his own. However, just 3 days after making this statement, Louis claimed to have already returned from Cuba and met with Isabella's sister, saying he had checked hospitals but found no signs of her. Louis expressed his despair and resignation to the situation, stating he was struggling to accept that his wife might be gone. He described Isabella as his soulmate and someone he thought he would be with forever. The next day, Louis and the police attempted to retrieve his daughter from his wife's family, but they refused to relinquish her. Louis ultimately took custody of his daughter with the help of the police, despite the scandal surrounding him. During the dispute, Isabella's sister repeatedly accused Louis of being responsible for Isabella's death. Louis's calm behavior and actions after his wife's disappearance raised suspicions among both Isabella's family and the police. Investigations revealed that Isabella and Louis had frequent arguments after the birth of their child. Family, friends, and neighbors all confirmed this. Isabella had confided in loved ones that Louis wanted to move to Australia, but she was opposed to leaving the United States. On May 30th, Louis gave an interview in which he denied any involvement in his wife's disappearance. He claimed they had plans for a happy life together, but now he was alone and their daughter would grow up without a mother. While investigating Isabella's disappearance, the police also looked into the origin of valuable coins found among Louis's belongings. It was discovered that Louis had previously worked as a first mate on a yacht. The captain of that yacht had a collection of 617 rare coins worth around $100,000, which was discovered a year earlier. While the yacht was unoccupied and docked in the Caribbean, thieves broke in and stole the coins on board. Although the perpetrator was not caught at the time, the yacht's captain later identified the coins found on Louis Bennett as part of the stolen loot, now that the FBI was investigating their origin. This new information led the FBI to obtain a search warrant for Louis's apartment. Previously, 225 coins had been found among his belongings when he was rescued. On June 16, 2017, the search of his apartment uncovered an additional 162 gold coins hidden in a closet. Meanwhile, Louis had relocated to England, where his parents lived, and had taken his daughter with him. However, due to financial difficulties, he returned to the United States and settled into an apartment valued at $125,000, while also receiving insurance payments for a lost catamaran. On August 28, 2017, Louis Bennett was arrested in Florida and charged with stealing coins. He pleaded not guilty. A few days later, a federal judge set his bail at $250,000, which Louis was unable to pay. As a result, he remained in custody while awaiting trial. Additionally, Louis attempted to have his wife declared dead. Louis benefited from his wife Isabella's disappearance by gaining control of their shared property and bank accounts. However, the judge refused to declare Isabella dead twice as the investigation into her disappearance was ongoing. In a separate case, Louis pleaded guilty to stealing coins and transporting them to the United States in November 2017. Louis's parents asked the judge to be lenient when sentencing him, citing the fact that his daughter had already lost her mother. In February 2018, Louis received a sentence of 7 months in prison followed by 3 years of probation. On the same day, Louis was charged with second-degree murder in Isabella's death. Authorities believed he intentionally caused the catamaran they were on to crash, which was allegedly a staged event to cover up the crime. The prosecutor's case was based on a claim that Louis wanted to inherit Isabella's wealth to pay off his debts and take their young daughter to live in Australia. Isabella had expressed fear of her husband in text messages a few months before her death, stating that she felt he no longer respected her. She expressed fear about returning home. In a message sent months before her disappearance, Isabella wrote, "If you no longer like or love me, let's resolve this immediately. Sad how you treated me the entire time." An inspection of the catamaran before it sank revealed that the portholes below the waterline were left open. The damage to the dual holes seemed to originate from within the vessel, near the waterline. The waterline is the point where the surface of the water meets the hull of a floating vessel. An expert hired by the FBI analyzed photos and videos taken by the U.S. Coast Guard of the catamaran before it sank. The expert concluded that Louis's account of the events was not credible. The analysis suggested that the vessel did not sink due to accidental damage, but rather appeared to have been intentionally scuttled. A professor of nautical architecture and ocean engineering at the Udata's Coast Guard Academy testified in court that the Coast Guard found no evidence of a collision that could have caused the catamaran to sink. Divers inspecting the vessel were cautious due to the risk of collapse, and eventually, the catamaran sank to a depth of over 4,000 feet, preventing a detailed inspection. 2 years after Isabella Hellman's disappearance, a judge officially declared her dead. Palm Beach County Circuit Judge Scott Suskauer issued a series of orders stating that Isabella was presumed to have died on May 14, 2017. Despite the passage of time, Isabella's body has not been found and she has not contacted her family. Based on the available evidence, it is presumed that Isabella is deceased. The statement said, in January 2019, U.S. District Judge Federico Moreno suspended Louis's February sentencing hearing in Miami and rescheduled it for May 28, saying he would not act until Isabella's family could personally visit her daughter Amelia, who turned 3 in July. In November 2019, Louis pleaded guilty to manslaughter and the second-degree murder charge against him was dropped. Before the plea deal, he faced a possible life sentence for second-degree murder, but the new charges limited his maximum sentence to 8 years in prison. According to a document filed with the court, Louis claimed he didn't remember what he was doing when he discovered his wife was missing. He didn't search for her on the catamaran or in the water, nor did he use flares to signal for help. Instead, Louis packed his belongings onto a life raft and then intentionally damaged the catamaran to make it flood, allowing him to escape on the raft. Prosecutors stated that Lewis waited 45 minutes after realizing his wife was missing to call for help. Notably, the U.S. Attorney's Office pointed out that Lewis was an experienced sailor with training in emergency procedures, having previously sailed from St. Martin to Australia. Don't understand why he failed to use his knowledge to respond to the emergency situation. Prosecutor states that Lewis admitted to being negligent in handing over control of the catamaran to his inexperienced wife, Isabella, resulting in her falling overboard and drowning. Despite being an experienced sailor with a Royal Yachting Association certification, Lewis failed to ensure Isabella wore proper safety gear. In contrast, Isabella had no formal sailing training or experience, and Lewis knew it. Lewis received training in emergency procedures, including manned overboard protocols and night sailing safety, but Isabella did not. The prosecutor notes that only Lewis knows the full story of what happened on the catamaran that night. Following Lewis' guilty plea, Isabella's family, through their lawyer, expressed their immense pain and asked Lewis to show remorse. They stated that while Lewis can never undo the harm caused by taking Isabella away, he continues to cause additional pain by depriving them of contact with his and Isabella's daughter, Amelia. Isabella Hellman's family is grieving and missing her dearly. Although they have had limited contact with her daughter Amelia through 3 FaceTime calls, they have not been able to see or hug her in a long time. They long to be reunited with Amelia and provide her with love and care. As a part of their family, they want to be with her. They urged Lewis Bennett to do the right thing. Lewis Bennett, Isabella's husband, was sentenced to 8 years in prison on May 28, 2019, after pleading guilty to manslaughter in connection with her death. During his sentencing hearing, Bennett apologized sincerely to Isabella's family for putting them through immense pain. He acknowledged that his actions led to a devastating tragedy for which he is truly remorseful. Lewis admitted to making poor decisions that worsened the situation. He expressed regret in federal court in Miami, where he waived his right to appeal as part of his plea bargain. Before the judge delivered the sentence, Lewis requested the opportunity to be released from prison early so that he could continue to care for their daughter, Amelia. Lewis expressed a desire to care for his daughter, saying, "I want to raise her in a way that honors my late wife's wishes." However, the judge ruled against him, sentencing him to 8 years in prison followed by 3 years of supervised release. As a result, Amelia will remain with her paternal grandparents in England for the time being. Mojave County is the second largest county in the state of Arizona, with its first inhabitants being the Mojave people. In the 1860s, Mojave County became known as a booming gold mining area and was used as a recreation town by miners and soldiers. But as industry developed, people began to move further away. The Great Depression brought with it a renewed interest in the gold rush. These days, Mojave has become a booming tourist destination, as many flock to the national parks, and use the area as a quick access route to the Grand Canyon, Route 66, and Hoover Dam. But half a century ago, Mojave County was the scene for a murder mystery that still haunts the sheriff's department to this day. On January 23, 1971, a group of 3 hunters were looking for game in a remote desert area in Mojave County, Arizona, when they came upon a canvas sack abandoned in the desert. The sack was loosely tied with a white cotton rope and left along the Hackberry gravel road in the isolated desert. It bore the words, "Dear Pack Ames Harris Navilco," printed on the side in green. Assuming it was an animal carcass left behind by another group of hunters, they opened the sack to investigate. To their shock and horror, they found the contorted body of a woman. The police were called to the scene immediately, and they sealed off the area to begin their investigation. It was obvious to investigators that they were dealing with a homicide. Whoever wrapped the victim up in the sack was clearly trying to hide the body. It was also clear that the woman had been murdered elsewhere and her remains unceremoniously dumped in the desert, 2 miles from the US 93 highway near Kingman in Arizona. It was becoming apparent that the case was going to be an uphill challenge for investigators, and firstly, they needed to determine who the victim was, and secondly, where the actual crime took place. Having canvassed the immediate area for any clues or possible belongings of the victim, investigators came up empty-handed. No identification, no bag, and no purse were found anywhere near the crime scene. It seemed like whoever killed her had made sure not to leave any incriminating clues behind and made a clean getaway. Investigators sent her body away to the Mojave County Coroner's Office for a post-mortem, while they continued to question the hunters about any suspicious activity in the area. It was obvious from the beginning that the woman was a victim of homicide, as she had been stuffed into a canvas sack. Her cause of death, though, baffled investigators. Although her neck was broken, decomposition had already set in, making it difficult to determine if there were any ligature marks around her neck. It was initially listed as unknown, as she showed no signs of blunt force trauma or gunshot wounds. There were also no signs of a health-related death, such as a stroke or a heart attack, and her organs were listed as healthy. Toxicology reports also suggested no drugs or alcohol in her system that may have led to an accidental overdose. Much later in the investigation, the cause of death status was changed to strangulation, based on the theory that she may have been murdered by someone she knew personally, perhaps a lover or spouse. It was also difficult to pinpoint the time of death, as her body had been partially frozen, but they estimate that she could have been killed any time between December 1st and 31st, 1970, toward the end of bow hunting season. They began working on creating a workable profile for investigators to use to solve the mystery. It was determined that the victim was a white female, aged between 35 to 40 years old. Her height was estimated at 5 foot 4 inches and her weight between 125 and 140 pounds. Her hair was brownish black and short with curls. Examiners added that she had scarring on her abdomen, consistent with the cesarean section birth, and internal signs indicated she may have been a mother of 3 children. They determined she may have been married, as a bone indentation was visible on her left ring, showing that she had once used a wedding band, but no jewelry was found on her body. She did not smoke, and lima beans were discovered in her digestive system as the last meal she had eaten. Her clothes were added to the description and included a multicolored size 14 blouse with 5 brass buttons and the paulets, and a long-sleeve black cardigan. She wore size 12 burnt orange stretch pants, with the label "Symphony is What's Happening" stitched on the inside. On her feet were pixie-style black leather boots that were a size 5.5, and bobby socks that were possibly white at some point. Her hair was described as being salon-styled, and her appearance clean and meticulous. Her nails were evenly manicured and clean. What stood out was the extensive dental work she had done. She was missing 2 molars and had a $500 Maryland bridge for dental implants fitted in. It was estimated she had work done on her teeth to the value of almost $2,100. She was given the placeholder name, the Mojave Jane Doe, and kept at the county mortuary until her identity could be determined. A composite drawing was made of the Jane Doe by a Flagstaff police sketch artist, but it remained businesslike and unflattering. This was given to investigators, along with the descriptions from the medical examiner. Using this information, investigators worked tirelessly to identify the woman. The first thing the investigators did was place a report in both the local and national papers with the description, composite sketch, and area the victim was found. It did not seem to bring in any promising leads, so they turned their attention to other methods of identification, given that she seemed to be well-groomed. Without any signs of neglect, investigators canvassed motels, hotels, and local stores in the area that catered to the upper middle class. Although they questioned people extensively, no one could remember such a woman crossing their paths. Investigators then looked at her clothing and tried to determine from where she had bought her clothes. A visit to all possible clothing outlets produced negative results. Investigators then turned to airports and conducted searches of flight manifestos, questioning staff about any person who had not been accounted for on any flight and followed up with those leads. This too led nowhere. Next, investigators took to placing a missing persons advert in dental magazines, explaining the scope of the work she had done on her teeth. This, they hoped, would jog the memory of the dentist who performed the surgeries, and they would come forward with her identity. When this option failed, they went through the filing system of a dentist lab in Phoenix, Arizona. After searching through files of over 8,000 patients, they had still come up short. Investigators widened their nets and set out the missing persons bulletin to Arizona, California, Nevada, and Utah. 23 women had been reported missing during that time period, but all were eventually found alive. The Jane Doe, however, was not among any of those reported missing. Investigators made a request for the fingerprints that were taken for record purposes during the autopsy. These were then sent off to the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Washington to be checked against the national database COIDAS. But still there was no trace of her on any system, missing or criminal. Investigators eventually turned to looking for a suspect among the hunting community, especially those who applied for hunting licenses during that particular season. Over 5,000 applications had been made, and each and every person was tracked down and questioned. Sheriff Floyd Sisney, Sergeant Don Parrish, and Detective Joe Chapin surmised that their Jane Doe may have been murdered by a spouse. Each applicant who was married was asked to produce their wife for questioning. This too ended up producing no results. The three men strongly believed that the murder was what they called a mama-papa killing, by an enraged husband. In speaking with local reporters, Sisney said he believed that eventually her identity would be revealed, as she may have children according to the autopsy reports. And somewhere out there, her children are missing their mother and being stalled by their father in search for her. But they'll start worrying before long. Time has a habit of solving murder mysteries, he said. The extensive investigation had covered every possible avenue, but investigators remained hopeful. Said Sisney, "We're still no closer to finding this woman's identity. But somebody out there must have seen her, may even know her, or may remember a small thing that could help us." Although the search for the identity of the Mojave Jane Doe continued in earnest with nationwide interest, no new leads developed. Given all the clues and descriptions, no one ever came forward to claim the victim or report her missing. After 3 months of waiting, authorities eventually buried the Mojave Jane Doe at the Mountain View Cemetery in Kingman, a county cemetery used by the Department for Unclaimed Bodies within Mojave County. Her headstone was simply marked Jane Doe, with her date of death as January 29, 1971. Months turned to years, then to decades. 30 years later, in 2001, Lori Miller, an investigator for the Special Investigation Unit SIU, was given the task of identifying the Mojave Jane Doe. The SIU was formed in 1999 as a part of the Mojave County Sheriff's Department initiative to investigate, solve, and eventually close cold cases that had been piling up over the years. By that year alone, there were over 60 unsolved cases, the oldest being the Mojave Jane Doe. It was a painstaking process for Miller and her team as they began the investigation. Like their predecessors, Miller, along with several other investigators, reviewed old case files and reports. They re-interviewed possible witnesses, hoping to refresh their memories and maybe pick up some new information and clues. They resubmitted the fingerprints and once again went back to the dental records to find the dentist possible for working on the Jane Doe. But it didn't produce the desired results. Miller and her team also reached out to an artist from the Museum of Northern Arizona, to a composite of the Jane Doe based on the features of her skull taken from the post-mortem examination pictures. They believe the new artist may be able to highlight the victim's features in a more professional way that would possibly catch the attention of someone who knew her. Once again, they used the national media to bring awareness to the case in the hopes that maybe one of the Jane Doe's children or family members may come forward after having not heard from them 3 decades. Again, they had no luck. Miller's investigative team also tried to find links to the company that produced the sack the victim had been found in, but discovered they had long since been bought out. Over the next 20 years, Miller and her team worked through the case periodically. They kept a watchful eye on databases and followed any and every tip and lead. If anything, their Jane Doe was the proverbial needle in the haystack. Investigators led by Miller also attempted to track down the make of the victim's clothes. But too many years had passed and the fashion range had all but disappeared. In November 2021, the case was officially registered to the NAMUS database, but still there were no positive results. Again, investigators found themselves at a dead end with all leads exhausted. However, as a part of their ongoing case review, the Sheriff's Department continued to update their Facebook post regarding missing or unidentified persons. 51 years later, after the Mojave Jane Doe was discovered, they were contacted by Othram Incorporated, a forensic genealogy company based in Texas, on their Facebook page. The company offered to use the new DNA technology being developed by geneticists to try and create a family tree based on their Jane Doe's DNA profile. But it would take time and money as the technology was new and expensive to carry out. Before that, though, investigators tried one more time to post the composite sketch on their Facebook page, hoping to find some tangible leads, but nothing worked out. Miller and her team had realized that there was only one way left. So basically, all we had left was to try to identify her through genetic genealogy, she said. For the investigation team, the case became personal. She was someone's wife, daughter, or mother, and was possible she was missed. Over the years, the investigation continued to lodge evidence with no results. It became part of their mantra to close the Mojave Jane Doe case and bring closure not only to the family, but for those voiceless victims as well. It was with a fervent prayer that the investigators went ahead with the genetic testing option. The was overwhelming. The story of the Mojave Jane Doe touched so many that within 5 days of starting the page, the remaining funds were raised and the testing could begin. The first thing investigators needed to do was exhume the remains of Mojave Jane Doe after being given the green light by the Mojave County Court in November 2022. Excavation of the burial site began. Although the remains were in poor condition due to age, scientists were able to retrieve enough genetic material to perform the testing. The body was reburied as Othram Inc. prepared to begin the testing process. The technology was new and the process was long. It was trusted, though, as genetic genealogy tested had become popular in 2018 after it helped track down the Golden State Killer. After more than 40 years using advanced DNA testing, the forensic-grade genome sequencing investigators were able to create a DNA profile. This profile was then used to match against ancestry websites that have profiles from thousands of people who have willingly donated their DNA samples in order to trace and track families from around the world. Investigators were able to create several family trees based on the Mojave Jane Doe's DNA profile. Spending countless hours on the family trees, investigators tracked down several distant relatives, and through the process of elimination, tracked down the closest living relatives. They eventually contacted a relative who was willing to provide a fresh DNA sample to assist in the investigation. It took another 3 months before any positive results were confirmed. On Monday, January 23, 2023, 52 years to the date, on which the Mojave Jane Doe was discovered, lead investigator Lori Miller received the call she had been waiting for. They had a name. After a half-century, the Jane Doe was discovered to be Colleen Audrey Rice. The news was first shared with the remaining relatives of Colleen before the announcement was made on the Mojave County Sheriff's Office Facebook page that same Monday afternoon. Colleen was born March 17, 1931, to parents James C. Rice and Flossie Truitt. She was raised in Portsmouth, Ohio, and is known to have a few family ties to eastern Kentucky. It is unclear if she had any siblings. Colleen attended Portsmouth High School, but it was unknown if she graduated, as she married William Davis in 1946, at the young age of 15. After searching through old school records, investigators were able to obtain an old yearbook photo to attach her case file. Colleen would have been 39 years old at the time of her death. Little else was known about her personal life. Investigators who tracked down her living relatives did not garner much information, as they were mostly distant relations of Colleen. What they did learn was that Colleen had become estranged from her family and husband. Although she showed signs of childbirth, there was no means of finding her children or records to prove if she had any at all. It seemed as if Colleen's life had been erased after she had disappeared. Investigators tried to find possible links to how Colleen arrived in Arizona, but that too dried up quickly. What they did know is that Colleen seemed to have been doing well for herself, as she was well-groomed and healthy when her body was first discovered. Investigators had also tried to find out if she had changed her name to start a new life away from her family, but the people in Kingman didn't seem to recognize her as well. Following the investigation, all legal work was completed to allow her living family members the chance to put her remains to rest. Her remains were exhumed and flown to Ohio in February 2023 to be buried alongside her family, with a headstone burying her name and date of birth and death. Case was finally gaining traction. They now knew who their victim was. Chief Development Officer at Othram Incorporated, Kristen Middleman, said it was a relief to finally have the name for the victim. It is heartwarming to witness law enforcement and the public come together to restore a murdered woman's name. After a half-century, she said, for the investigators, solving the crime became personal. They believed Colleen deserved better in death. She deserved dignity. Lead investigator Lori Miller kept a copy of the composite sketch taped to her computer as a daily reminder as to who and what they were fighting for while investigating the cold case. This was a Jane Doe. Now I have a name. She's always been a person. Now she's a person with a name. Kind of hits you, said Miller. According to news reports, Miller said that one of the challenges they faced in the investigation was finding people who were still around from when the incident first happened. It became quite daunting in the fact that we were trying to locate people that were still alive, she said. WOWK 13 News was able to find a distant relative of Colleen's, who also happened to be a genealogist himself. Eli Allen is related to Colleen from his mother's side of the family and currently lives in Ohio. Allen said that when he first heard about the case and discovered the name of the victim, he realized they were related when I saw Rice, which is in my mother's line. I had to know we were related because it was that much more intimate, he said. Mother's line have to know how we're related because it was that much more intimate. Identifying Colleen after more than 50 years is a testimony to the work he and so many others are doing. The more baffling question for investigators now is who killed Colleen and discarded her body in such an undignified manner. Autopsy reports did not find any foreign DNA on the victim's body at the time, and the possibility of assault was ruled out entirely. The theory of her being murdered by her husband was also ruled out as interview with a family suggested that Colleen had left of her own volition. No one who knew her personally at the time had seemed particularly interested in finding her, as there has never been a missing person report filed. The 50-year period of the investigation, Colleen's murder had not been linked to any possible murderers, who may have been active in the area around the 1970s. Her manner of death did not provide many clues either for investigators to determine patterns related to known serial killers at the time. Even though Colleen had been identified, the case remains ongoing. The SIU is still investigating in the hopes of finding the suspect or suspects responsible for Colleen's untimely death. Investigators are appealing to the public to come forward with any information regarding Colleen's murder and information about her life, since she left her family behind in Ohio to start afresh in Arizona. The public is urged to contact the Mojave County Sheriff's Office Special Investigation Unit. The numbers will be provided in the description box below. In covering cases such as Colleen's, we hope to highlight not only the dedicated work of investigators, but the truly amazing advances in technology that are now making it possible to solve cases that many believe could have remained cold forever. But apart from that, we also hope that these cases keep our community informed. If you have faced a similar situation or have information regarding this case or any other unsolved cases, please reach out to the relevant authorities. You may just be the key to cracking the case. So looking back at today's case, which part did you find the saddest? The fact that it took decades to find her identity, or that no one really looked for her when she went missing? The case of Christy Lynn Mullins. Christy Lynn Mullins was born on August 28, 1960, in Columbus, Ohio, one of 6 children in a large family. They lived in a quiet neighborhood, away from the noise and chaos of the city. In the summer of 1975, 14-year-old Christy spent most of her days socializing with friends and family, often going to the local neighborhood swimming pool. In late August, Christy babysat for a family friend on the evening of August 22nd. The next day, August 23rd, she woke up around noon and decided to go swimming to cool off. She invited her sister Kim to join her, and they went to the residential area. While Kim went swimming, Christy relaxed on a deck chair. A short time later, Kim went ashore and found Christy nowhere to be seen. But Kim decided not to look for her and instead stayed at the pool. Surprisingly, when Kim returned home, Christy was not there. Hours passed and Christy still hadn't come home. Kim became even more worried. She decided to look for Christy and ran into a neighbor who told her that the police had found the body of a young woman a few miles away, but they had not been able to identify it. Kim rushed home to tell her parents, who immediately called the police to report Christy missing. It was very likely that the body found belonged to Christy, so the police directed them to the morgue for identification. Although it was difficult to recognize the identity of the body due to the severely bruised face, Christy's mother eventually accepted that the body was Christy's, her beloved daughter, thanks to the birthmark on her leg. Police later explained to the family what had happened. It turned out that at about 2:30 p.m. that same day, a man reported finding a body in the woods behind the local shopping center. He, his wife, and son had gone there to buy toys, but before entering the store, their son wanted to take a walk on the trail behind the building. This path was a popular walking path leading to a river, and the area was famous for its beauty. Together with his parents, the son went for a walk on this trail. During their hike, they came across a disturbing scene about 10 yards down the trail. A man was kneeling on top of someone and repeatedly beating him with a wooden object. When he saw the family, he immediately ran away. The father rushed to the scene and found a seriously injured little girl covered in blood. His wife, who had medical training, checked the victim's pulse, but there was none. The father quickly went to a nearby shopping center and called the police from a store. He and his wife provided investigators with a detailed description of the suspect, who was a tall, slim young man with long black hair, wearing jean shorts and boots, about 20 years old. Police created a sketch of the suspect based on their description and distributed it to patrol officers. However, the investigation of the crime scene yielded no results. The wooden object used as the murder weapon was found, but they discovered no other evidence linking the perpetrator. Notably, the victim's hands were tied with a telephone cord and her bikini top was pulled down. Her t-shirt and shoes were found next to her body. Despite these signs, forensic experts found no evidence that a sexual assault had occurred. Luckily, detectives were able to continue their investigation thanks to new information from Kim, who told them about a conversation between Christy and a friend, Carol. The police summoned Carol. Carol recounted to police a suspicious phone call she had received from a stranger claiming to be a local DJ. The man had called her to talk about a fake cheerleading competition at the state fair, which was supposedly being held behind the local shopping mall. He announced the event would start at 1:45 p.m. and had told Carol to wait for someone at the entrance to the forest trail. The police were skeptical about Carol's story, and when they dug deeper, they discovered many inconsistencies. According to Carol, she had originally planned to attend the event with her sister, but they had run into Christy and her sister on the way. Carol then invited Christy to join her, and they left their sisters behind to go to the mall. However, when they arrived at the entrance to the woods, no one appeared and Carol claimed that she had gone to the shopping center to ask for the time. When she turned around, Christy was gone. The police investigation revealed that there had been no cheerleading competitions in town, casting doubt on the reason for Carol and Christy's trip to the woods. Police suspected that the mysterious phone call might have been a ruse to lure Carol into the woods, but they were unable to trace the call to identify the caller. Further investigation revealed discrepancies in Carol's story. She claimed to have met Christy and her sister on the street, but Kim said they had been at the pool and Carol had come to meet them there. Additionally, Christy's mother reported a strange conversation with Carol later that evening, which raised further suspicions. Carol apologized to Christy's mother and revealed that she had been the intended target of a murder involving two people. However, she quickly retracted her words and left. Christy's mother reported this to the police. The police questioned Carol again, but she denied making a statement and stuck to her original story. Carol was then given a polygraph test, which did not reveal any signs of deception when Carol answered key questions. As a result, investigators shifted focus away from Carol and pursued other leads. Police intensified their search for the killer 3 days after Christy's murder. A police officer patrolling the streets of Columbus spotted a man who bore a striking resemblance to a sketch of Christy's killer. Patrol officers quickly called detectives to the scene and asked Jack to accompany them to the station for questioning. The man, Jack Carmen, 25, agreed to go with them. However, the police soon realized that Jack was severely mentally disabled with an IQ of about 50 points. Results based on many different tests. As a result, Jack had limited communication skills and could not read or write. He was cared for by a specialist medical facility and lived in a supervised apartment. Despite these challenges, detectives could not ignore the striking resemblance between Jack and the composite sketch of the suspect in Christy's case. The interrogation process was extremely difficult due to Jack's limited ability to understand and answer questions. Most of the time, he just answered with one word or stayed silent. The detectives began to question whether Jack was capable of fully understanding their questions. To improve the situation, they had to ask very simple and specific questions. After 6 hours of questioning, detectives were finally starting to get results. They were finally able to extract a confession from Jack. According to his testimony, on the day in question, he had left his apartment, taken the bus to the shopping center, and bought a shirt and pants. As Jack walked through the parking lot, he saw Christy sitting on a fence near the entrance to a wooded trail. He approached her, tied her up by tying her hands, and then dragged her into the woods where he carried out the assault. After the attack, Christy tried to run away, but Jack quickly caught up with her. He picked up a nearby piece of wood and repeatedly hit her in the head. Jack then ran to the main road in front of the shopping center and boarded the bus. The next day, police took Jack to the forest where he allegedly committed the crime. There, he pointed out the exact spot and provided specific details that only the perpetrator would know, including the fact that the piece of wood used to strike the victim broke in half. Investigators also verified the testimony, asking the couple who found Christy to identify the person they had seen on the day of the incident. Both identified the man they had seen as Jack. As a result, Jack was charged with multiple offenses, including assault and murder. They chose to include it in the charges. The prosecutor initially sought the death penalty, but Jack's lawyer negotiated a deal. In exchange for a life sentence, Jack would plead guilty before the judge, thereby avoiding execution. The case moved swiftly, with thousands of people following. Just 11 days after the murder, on September 3rd, Jack was sentenced to life in prison. However, after the trial, public opinion began to shift and many people started to question Jack's guilt. As more details about his confession and his background emerged in the media, people began to wonder whether he was truly capable of committing such a heinous crime. Those who knew Jack found it hard to believe that he was capable of the crime. He was a passive, timid, and compliant person who would agree to anything if pushed hard enough. In the past, he had even taken the blame for something he didn't do, like the time he claimed responsibility for breaking a boiler at a charity center when in fact someone else was to blame. This behavior raised doubts about his ability to make a genuine confession to the crime. His supporters felt that the police must have manipulated him into confessing by feeding him information and asking pressured questions. For instance, if the police asked him if he hit the victim with a piece of wood, and he answered yes, they could use that as a confession. However, this approach can be unreliable, especially considering Jack's tendency to confess to anything when under threat. Even the mention of the electric chair was enough to make him agree to whatever the detectives wanted. Furthermore, the police took Jack to the crime scene at the same time as the witnesses, a married couple who later identified him at the police station. This raised concerns that the witnesses had been biased, as they had already seen Jack and knew he was a suspect, despite the police's claims that they never crossed paths. There were several red flags surrounding Jack's alleged involvement in the crime. For instance, the police failed to locate the bus driver or any passengers who claimed to have seen Jack on his way to the city center, which contradicted his own statement. Moreover, multiple people at the charity organization building where Jack lived and worked said to have seen him at around 1:30 p.m. This created a major timing issue. Even if Jack had left immediately after being seen by these witnesses, the bus ride to the shopping center on the outskirts of town would have taken at least 40 minutes. Given the crime was committed at 1:50 p.m., it was logistically impossible for Jack to have made it on time. This cast serious doubts about Jack's guilt and raised suspicions that the police may have coerced his confession. Christy's parents, too, began questioning whether Jack was the true culprit. At the height of the controversy, approximately 70 individuals gathered in front of City Hall on September 9th to draw attention to the case and advocate for a comprehensive investigation. They established a public committee aimed at securing justice for Jack. As a result, Jack was assigned a new lawyer who swiftly petitioned for a case review. After several months, a judge dismissed Jack's original confession and ordered a new trial, putting the onus on the prosecution to establish his guilt from the beginning. This marked a daunting challenge for the prosecution, making their case almost unviable. Norman Mills, Christy's father, began his own investigation while preparations for the new trial were underway. Dissatisfied with the way the detectives had worked, Norman took matters into his own hands. Immediately after the murder, Norman and several neighbors searched the area where Christy was found. They discovered a bloody pair of jeans shorts and men's underwear in the woods. They turned the items over to the police, who had initially missed them. It was unclear whether these items were related to the case or if they had been examined for evidence. Jack's new trial began in 1977, 2 years after the murder. The defense had two tasks: first and foremost, to prove Jack's innocence and also to try to identify the real killer. In fact, they already had a pretty strong candidate for the role, who they considered to be the prime suspect. The man who found Chris's body along with his wife was Henry Newell, who was 25 years old at the time of the murder. At the beginning of the trial, Jack's lawyers had amassed an impressive list of reasons to suspect Henry of murder, and during the trial, the list grew even longer. Initially, Henry attracted attention because of his criminal record. Beginning in his teenage years, he had been arrested multiple times for various crimes, serving 3 prison sentences. He had successfully escaped from prison twice before being captured and brought back. At the time of Jack's trial, he was serving his 4th sentence, this time for burning down a house to collect insurance money. Lawyers also reviewed evidence from Christ's case and found some very suspicious details in his testimony. Henry said he had found her body, ran over, and threw a bloody piece of wood aside. He explained this by saying that he was in a state of shock at the time, but acting like that still seemed odd. Why did he pick up the murder weapon and throw it from his body for no apparent reason? He also testified that he thought the girl was still alive, so he took off his shirt and pressed it to her face. This action also raised questions. Did he actually try to stop the bleeding, or was his shirt stained with blood during the murder, and he needed to justify it somehow? Jack's lawyer found a store clerk in the mall where Henry had run to call the police. She said he was not wearing a shirt but was wearing jean shorts, although by the time police arrived, he was wearing a different pair of pants. The employee also confirmed that Henry had a new bruise on his face, as if someone had hit him. When asked why she didn't immediately report this to the police, she said no one had asked her. The officers themselves should have noticed this bruising but ignored it. Henry also agreed to take a polygraph test, but he ended up vomiting right on the machine. Another witness was Henry's neighbor, who said that on the night of the murder, he had talked to Henry and noticed many new scratches on his hands. The man also mentioned seeing a telephone cord in Henry's garage that was the same color and shape as the cord used to tie the victim's hands. That's not all. The neighbor said that Henry had once told him a very strange story. He claimed to know Chris's 14-year-old friend Carol, and that they had once swum naked together in the pool. This story shocked everyone involved in the case. It turned out that Henry was acquainted with Carol, who was also directly involved in the case. His wife, Pam, also testified in court, saying everything had happened exactly as they told police on the first day. They had gone to the mall, and their son wanted to go for a walk. They went into the woods and found the body. Pam added that up until that point. Henry had remained at home and only stepped outside for a few minutes to scare away neighborhood children who had begun throwing firecrackers into their yard. Carol also testified, saying she had never met Henry. She was also asked about her intentions in telling Chris's mother that things should not have escalated to this point. But Carol again claimed she did not remember saying anything like that. Henry himself repeated his story without any changes and insisted that he had nothing to do with the crime. One of the most important moments of the trial was the showing of the entire recording of Jack's interrogation. After watching it, it became clear to everyone that Jack had simply been forced to confirm the detective's words that he had committed murder. Jack barely said anything and didn't seem to fully understand what the police wanted from him. But that was not the most important moment of the trial. On the 5th day, another unexpected witness appeared. It was Bobby, Henry's stepson, and his testimony truly shocked everyone following the case. Bobby revealed that that day, Henry had indeed gone out of the house to chase away the children who had thrown firecrackers into the yard. When Henry returned home, his shirt and sandals were missing, and Henry had scars on his hands and face. Bobby was told by his parents that they would be going to the shopping center, but when they arrived, they instead took him on a walk in the woods behind the center. Bobby claims he never asked to go for a walk, which contradicts what his parents initially said. During the walk, they found Henry's torn sandal and then Christy's body. Bobby's mother instructed him not to tell anyone about what he saw. At the trial, Bobby's grandmother testified about a disturbing comment made by Henry during Christy's farewell ceremony. After expressing her sadness about Christy's death, Henry replied, "It will teach her to keep her mouth shut." Another witness, Henry's friend, came forward and said that Henry had confessed to him that he accidentally killed Christy. Although the evidence clearly pointed to Henry's involvement, the prosecutor surprisingly announced that they would not pursue a case against Henry. The prosecutor also claimed that the initial investigation was handled correctly despite acknowledging that the police missed or ignored many clues from the beginning. The public was outraged by this decision, leading the prosecutor to change his mind 2 days later and agreed to reopen the investigation into Christy's death. Christy's father refused to give up on seeking justice and filed a civil lawsuit against Jack, but not because he believed Jack was involved in the murder. Rather, he hoped to gain access to the case files and gather more information. Unfortunately, this effort also proved unsuccessful. The case had remained stagnant until 2013 when Henry died of terminal cancer. Despite this, in the same year, former attorney John Doe became interested in the case and conducted his own investigation. He contacted all parties involved in gathering new information. Christy's relatives had provided John with a box of records that Christy's father had collected. After reviewing the records and talking to dozens of people, John believed that Henry was the culprit behind Christy's murder. John's investigation revealed that Carol had bought marijuana from Henry, which made him suspect that Henry was involved in the crime. This new discovery created a possible connection between Henry and Carol, which could explain why Carol brought Christy to the forest. One theory is that Carol planned to meet Henry in the forest to buy an illegal substance. It's possible that Carol invited Christy along, using the DJ story as a cover. A more sinister explanation suggests that Carol brought Christy to the forest at Henry's request, intending for him to harm her. However, Christy resisted, as evidenced by Henry's injuries, and he ultimately killed her. When John took over the case, Henry had passed away from cancer at the age of 63. However, John continued his work and released a book about Christy's murder. The release of the book sparked a new wave of interest, and Christy's relatives demanded that the investigation be reopened. Some of Henry's relatives also confirmed that Henry was the one who killed the girl. This led to the reopening of the murder investigation in May 2014. Detectives re-examined the evidence, interviewed dozens of people, and reassessed Henry's confession. They re-examined Christy's clothes and found traces of semen, but they were too small for DNA analysis. The investigation lasted until late 2015, when detectives announced that Henry was the one who had committed the crime. But because he had passed away, the case could not go to court. The investigation ended with the conclusion that Henry had left home, gone to the road behind the shopping center, seen Christy alone, and decided to assault her with a telephone cord, taking her deep into the woods. Henry had attacked Christy, injuring her. Then he killed her with a piece of wood. Returning home, Henry recounted the incident to his wife, and the two began to make plans to avoid punishment. For many years afterward, never revealed the truth. Police later apologized to Christy's family for their careless handling of the incident. Our first case today takes us to Rock County, a county in the southwestern corner of the state of Minnesota. Although Minnesota is known as the land of 10,000 lakes, Rock County is one of the 4 countries that does not have a natural lake. On March 13, 1981, while on a routine city cleanup, a Department of Transport worker was busy clearing out the concrete culverts along Interstate 90, off Highway 23, and Beaver Creek Township as he raked away the debris. He was shocked when he came across some skeletal remains. The worker immediately contacted his supervisor, who called the police. When police arrived, the area was sealed off and all present were questioned regarding the discovery. The supervisor explained that the culverts were cleared out annually and the last cleanup occurred on October 21, 1980. Investigators surmised that the body may have been dumped in the culvert any time between October 1980 and 1981. Forensic technicians and crime scene investigators removed the body in work to collect any possible clues that may have been left behind. The body was transported to Ramsey County Medical Examiner's office. Identifying the John Doe proved to be a difficult task for the medical examiner. The body had been badly decomposed and was barely recognizable. From what remained of the near-complete skeleton, the coroner determined the John Doe to be a white male between the ages of 30 to 50 years old. His estimated height was between 5 feet 6 inches to 5 feet 8 inches. There was no way to determine weight, hair, or eye color, given the condition of the body, nor were there any distinguishing birthmarks or tattoos. The cause of death was listed as a homicide, with the coroner remarking that there was a possibility the victim had been shot. There had been a wound to the skull that was consistent with a small caliber gun, but no gun or shell casing was found in the area. Plaster casts of his teeth were taken for dental record purposes and DNA samples were extracted from the remains. Getting fingerprints have proved impossible as his fingertips had disintegrated with decomposition. The victim was found clothed in green cotton work pants, a leather belt, and boxer shorts. He wore either light tan or white slip-on engineer boots size 8 to 9 and 2 pairs of green socks on each foot. In his possession was a black plastic comb and a locket with a baby's picture on the inside. Using this vague description, investigators began an extensive search on the area, questioning the workers from the Department of Transport who had worked the area since the previous October. A rough sketch was developed by a police artist, along with details provided by the medical examiner. Hostas were made and circulated in and around Beaver Creek Township. They also questioned motorists who used the road frequently about any unusual activity in the area. Locals to the area were questioned regarding the John Doe, who was found in the culvert, but no one seemed to recall anyone fitting his description. A search of missing persons databases in and around Minnesota yielded no results, and it seemed as if no one knew who this man could be. A lack of leads ultimately led to the case growing cold. No one had come forward to report anyone missing in the area. Although police periodically looked over the file, nothing new came of the information. As technology advanced, DNA profiles of known criminals were becoming digitized in order to allow law enforcement to have quicker and easier access to records. A profile had been developed of the Rock County John Doe back in 1981 and was used to search for him on national criminal databases. However, this too proved futile as there was no records of the victim found. The case lay cold for decades without any new information. In 2018, genetic genealogy began changing the face of criminal investigations. Having used this new technology to track down and capture the infamous Golden State Killer, other law enforcement agencies soon took notice. This technology, they believed, would surely be a game changer in identifying unsolved cold cases. The Rock County Sheriff's Office partnered with the nonprofit agency, the Doe Network, in August 2022 and reopened the Rock County John Doe case. They developed a digital composite sketch from the autopsy photos of the John Doe that was uploaded to their site and all other missing person databases. The next task was to raise enough funds to pay for DNA testing. Through community initiatives and fundraisers, the sheriff's office were able to reach their target and pay for all the tests needed to perform the task. Working with the genealogy websites, volunteers from the Doe Network used the DNA samples provided by the sheriff's office to start tracing familial connections. After a few months of poring through thousands of family trees, they were able to find a familial mat in Omaha, Nebraska. The team then made contact with the woman who said she didn't know of any relative who had lived in Rock County or went missing but was willing to meet with them. After contacting agents from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and investigators from the Rock County Sheriff's Office, officials made their way to Omaha. In early November 2022, in Omaha, investigators met with the members of the Gattiano family and the woman who was the closest match to John Doe's profile. The family members volunteered their DNA for testing. On December 20th, 2022, investigators discovered that 2 of the profiles matched the strongest against their John Doe's profile. They returned to Omaha with the results and met with the woman who uploaded her profile to the genealogy website, along with her aunt and uncle. During interviews with the family, detectives discovered that the woman's aunt actually had a brother who had gone missing in 1971 named Luis Anthony Gasciano. When they showed investigators a picture of Luis, they knew they had found their John Doe. The family could not provide much information about Luis' life, as many of their family members had since passed. Luis would have been born sometime in 1946. What they did reveal to investigators was that Luis had been a notorious bank robber in the 1960s. According to his family and archived news articles, Luis had first been accused of robbing a bank in his hometown of Omaha. He was eventually caught while trying to rob a First National City Bank in New York on January 25, 1966 for $96,400 when he was 20 years old. According to reports, Luis was overpowered by the bank teller and ended up shooting the counter instead. He had injured his hand in the scuffle. The article states that Luis told detectives he had been desperate and depressed and wanted his life to be over. Luis was charged with attempted robbery, felonious assault, and weapons possession. Since then, family members heard from him infrequently, but all communication had ceased from 1971. He was not reported missing at the time because he had a strained relationship with his family. They were just as baffled to hear he had been murdered 10 years after losing contact with his family. No one had ever come forward looking for Luis since he had been missing. For investigators, half the battle has been won, as they know their John Doe's identity. Rock County Sheriff Evan Verbrugge said the moment was bittersweet. While it's not news anyone wants, Luis Gasciano's family, at long last, has some answers. And while there is still much more to be learned about Mr. Gasciano's death, knowing his identity, even decades after he died, is a critically important new clue in this case, he said. Verbrugge said the case will remain open, despite the uphill challenge. It's going to be difficult for us to find out, but our job is to try and get answers and the cost is minimal, he said. Authorities urge anyone who may have known Luis Anthony Gasciano between 1971 and 1981 or has any other information about the case to come forward and contact the Rock County Sheriff's Office. Numbers will be made available in the description box below. Our next case takes us to Rock County, Wisconsin. It is a country of open spaces and parks and offers anyone a chance to enjoy the great outdoors and a chance to reconnect with nature. But for 27 years, a mystery baffled law enforcement officials until new DNA testing brought some much-needed answers. On November 11, 1995, in a wooded area near Bradford, Wisconsin, a group of hunters were tracking down a herd of deer. Gary Gilbank wanted to share with his nephews his passion for hunting, unaware that he was about to show them a sight from a horror movie instead. As they reached the southern bank of the Turtle Creek, they stopped short. On the ground lay the skeletal remains of a man. It baffled them. They owned the very land the skeleton lay on, and none of them knew who it belonged to or how it came to be here. Without hesitation, they contacted the police. Investigators arrived and immediately cordoned off the scene to begin their investigation. He appeared to be laying on his belly, with his hands over his head. His head and back were partially covered by a denim jacket, and he had been wearing a t-shirt with the name of the British band Venom on it, and a plaid shirt. He also wore gray camouflage pants, and there was one Nike sneaker next to the body. The other was not found. Investigators collected a chrome pendant of a horned goat, a Budweiser lighter, an Aquatech wristwatch, and a tube of Carmex lip balm from the scene. The remains were removed and transported to the coroner's office for further examination. The coroner began an extensive examination of John Doe. There had been no signs of trauma visible on the remains. His height was estimated to be between 5 feet 4 inches and 5 feet 6 inches, with his weight at 140 pounds. His estimated age was between 17 to 20 years old. Using a dental analysis, the coroner determined that he had been a Caucasian male. He had received good dental care with only 2 fillings. He still had his wisdom teeth intact, with 2 having partially erupted and 1 being impacted. Samples of hair were taken for a toxicology analysis. There was no trace of cocaine, codeine, or morphine, which ruled out the possibility of an overdose due to long-term opioid addiction. But the coroner did not rule out that he may have been intoxicated or had taken hallucinogenic drugs prior to his death. His cause of death was not determined, but it was possible that he had died from hypothermia after falling into the creek. The coroner believed that it was possible he may have been intoxicated and become disoriented before deciding to lay down and had died as a result of exposure to the elements. There had also been speculation as to his exact time of death. The coroner estimated that he may have died around fall or winter of 1994. Investigators had no leads apart from the clues they found on the John Doe at the scene. They launched a full-on investigation that led them down several paths. In the meanwhile, John Doe's skull was cremated, and the ashes together with his remains were buried at the Johnson Town Center Cemetery used to bury John and Jane Does. Working on the theory that he may have been intoxicated and disoriented, investigators searched all known accidents that occurred around the estimated time of John Doe's death. They believed he may have been the survivor of a car wreck and had wandered off after the accident. However, no reports were made of a missing man fitting his description. In fact, there had been no missing persons reports made of any man fitting John Doe's description. Investigators then revisited all rock concerts that were held in the area based on the clothes he was wearing at the time he was found. People from within the heavy metal community were interviewed, but no one remembered anyone who fit John Doe's description. They had reached another dead end here. Given his estimated age, they searched through school yearbooks and government records, but found none of the teenagers in that time period were reported missing. Interviews with the students from the local school district provided no leads either, leading investigators back to square one. The investigation then turned to several witness statements about a man that was dubbed River Guy by the locals. According to witnesses, on October 16, 1994, at around 5:30 p.m., a young man in his early 20s was seen running toward the creek, where the body was eventually discovered. Witnesses alleged that the River Guy was wearing clothes similar to the John Doe and had been intoxicated and distraught that afternoon. Statements made by these witnesses include that the man had been stumbling along toward the creek and had fallen several times into the water as he tried to climb the embankment. They also alleged he had yelled at bystanders to get away from him, and he mentioned being wronged by a woman named Mary and being a fugitive. The theory remained one of the strongest until later forensic tests proved that River Guy and John Doe may not have been the same person due to time discrepancies. According to later forensic estimations, the John Doe's rate of decomposition showed that he may have died around May 1995 and not in October 1994, when River Guy was last seen. This also dispelled the initial estimated time of death given by the original medical examiner. The next lead came in the form of a pendant found at the scene. In 2010, detectives from the Rock County Sheriff's Office traced the pendant back to a Janesville area craftsman. The man had been active in the local metal rock scene and had crafted several rock and metal-inspired pieces for fans. When shown the pendant, he told police that it was indeed one of his pieces. However, he made several similar pendants and over the years had sold them to dozens of people. When shown a composite sketch of John Clinton Doe, the craftsman was unable to recognize him as a possible customer. This caused yet another hurdle in the investigation. The Rock County Sheriff's Office teamed up with the Smithsonian Institution scientists to perform an isotopic analysis of the John Doe's bones. Isotopic analysis has been used in forensic anthropology to determine the region of origin of unidentified human remains. From bone tissue, forensic scientists can determine the region of birth of a person. The Smithsonian scientists discovered that John Doe had spent a significant amount of time in the Midwestern area around the Great Lakes. These areas included the states of Wisconsin, Illinois, Minnesota, and Michigan. This information allowed investigators to narrow down the field of investigation. Having identified the John Doe's possible birth area, investigators went back to the drawing board in 2016 and reworked the composite sketches developed by the Rock County Sheriff's Department and the FBI in 2013 and 2014 respectively. This time they regressed the sketch to age 16 and added some color, before distributing it to the public. Private investigator Jack Fries said that the department hoped it would refresh the memory of anyone who may have interacted with him that year. The whole idea here is to get people to think about what was going on in the early 90s and in their lives, and do they have any connection with this guy at all, he said. Their attempts had failed, but investigators were not to give up so easily. For the next 2 years, private investigator Jack Fries continued at work finding a way to identify the young John Doe. In June 2018, Fries together with Detective Corin Billhorn reached out to the DNA Doe Project, a non-profit volunteer-based group that helps with identifying unsolved John and Jane Doe cases. Using the DNA extracted and preserved from the original autopsy, the team set out to find the identity of the John Doe. In partnership with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Flugent Genetics, Aerodyne Research Incorporated, and Full Genome Corporation, the long journey began. Using genetic genealogy and ancestry website GEDmatch, the research team were able to locate and find possible relatives of John Clinton Doe in February 2019. They had a tentative identity, but investigators needed to be 100% sure. Over the next 3 years, investigators worked with the University of North Texas as they tracked down relatives of the John Doe. Upon interviewing with the relatives, they discovered that 2 of the volunteers may share a half-sibling relationship with the John Doe through their father. Country officials applied for and received a warrant to exhume the body of the potential father. In late 2021, once DNA was extracted, testing once again began in earnest, and they finally announced the identity of John Clinton Doe. On June 14, 2020, County Sheriff's Office announced that Carl Isaacs Jr., age 20, was identified as the body in the creek. Carl was born on April 30, 1974 in Delavan, Wisconsin. His parents divorced when he was very young, and it seemed that he had never quite recovered from the trauma. Carl had attended an alternative high school for Badger, Delavan, Darien, and Elkhorn area high school students. In 1991, at age 17, Carl had developed a substance addiction. He had also joined a group of friends who engineered a crime spree, resulting in damage to property and multiple burglaries. In March 1992, was sentenced to 5 years in prison for burglary and vandalism of golf carts at the Delbrick Golf Course in Delavan. Between April of 1992 and fall of 1993, Carl was sent to 3 different prisons, finally settling at the Oak Hill Correctional Institute in Oregon, Wisconsin. While there, he had been released to undergo a substance abuse recovery program at a halfway house in Madison. He was also occasionally allowed to return to his mother's home under house arrest. Carl sometimes played the role of informant to authorities in drug-related cases. In April 1995, he had been on one of his house arrest visits. On April 16, 1995, he had suddenly disappeared. He was never heard from or seen again. A county judge immediately signed an arrest warrant for Carl for probation violation. That had been renewed annually until April 2018. Investigator Jack Fries pointed out that no one had really come forward reporting Carl Isaacs as missing during the time he disappeared, which complicated their investigation. In this case, mom and dad were divorced. He was kind of living with his mom, although I don't think he stayed there very often. He was kind of on the streets, basically homeless. I don't think he had a friend, nobody at all, who would have missed him to the point where they tried to find him, he said. Fries believed that something drove Carl to break the rules of his probation and leave his house. During the announcement of the identity of Carl Isaacs Jr. at the press conference held on June 14, 2022, Rock County Sheriff Troy Knutson said that it was a sad moment, but also a resolution to a decades-long mystery. I'm kind of sad to have to get together and discuss the untimely death of a young individual in our community, but I'm glad to finally be able to bring a little bit of resolution to the individual's identity. Knutson declined answering any questions as to why family never reported him missing or any details about them. He did, however, indicate that the family had been bracing for the news following the discovery of the DNA matches and the investigation. Instead, he reminded all those present that the case was still ongoing. We're really looking to flesh out exactly who he was and how he found himself in that particular location. That's where we're looking to the community to help provide some of those details for us, he said. Nunn's son added that the investigation was a lengthy process, but with the help of technological advancements, it made the identification possible. He thanked and credited Jack Fries, who was a former employee of the Rock County Coroner's Office, who assisted voluntarily on the case. He also thanked the DNA Doe Project, which provided police with investigative breakthrough that helped identify Carl Isaacs. Nick Gilbank, who was the man that discovered Carl's body, still remembers the moment he found the body in the creek. I walked over to see what I was looking at, and there next to a garbage bag of his belongings was a clothed skeleton. I remember kneeling down and picking up the shirt, and there was a skull, completely decomposed. Although he still has some questions, he is glad that there's some kind of closure in knowing John Doe's identity. "I guess I'm glad they finally identified the remains," he said. On the quiet evening of October 19, 2004, a 28-year-old mother named Kesha Brown was found lifeless in her home in Las Vegas, her body battered and violated. The police were left with a thin trail of evidence and no suspects in sight. The case eventually went cold, but the detectives never forgot Kesha. Several years later, the hunt for her killer reignited and DNA technology helped shed new light on the investigation. So who was this ruthless murderer and what was their motive behind this killing? Las Vegas is a city that never sleeps. It is the most populous city in the state of Nevada with its iconic casinos, world-class entertainment, and endless nightlife. It's no wonder that this desert oasis has become a playground for adults seeking thrills and excitement. But beyond the glitz and glamour lies a fascinating history. From the early days of mobsters and showgirls to the modern-day transformation into a global entertainment capital, it is within this fascinating city that a brutal murder case unfolds. Kesha was born in the mid-1970s, but much of her life is shrouded in mystery. There is not much known about her early years, as there is scarce information about her parents, the schools she attended, or whether she had any siblings. But what is certain is that she was a young mother living in a modest apartment on the bustling East Flamingo Road in the year 2004. Her daughter Kalia was her pride and joy, and she would do anything to ensure her little girl had a better life. What exactly Kesha did to make ends meet is also unknown, but what is evident is that she was a survivor, a woman who refused to let life beat her down. At the time, Kesha was also in a relationship with a man who was only identified as her boyfriend and whose connection to Kalia remains unknown. The events of October 19, 2004, which was a Tuesday, would forever be etched in the memories of those who knew Kesha. That day, witnesses saw a stranger arrive in a red sedan and park outside her apartment. No one knew who he was or what his intentions were, but he wasted no time in entering Kesha's apartment. It is not clear where Kesha's daughter was at the time, but she was not around and was safely away from the apartment. For several minutes, the man was inside, and then he finally emerged with a duffel bag in his hand. He darted back to his car, started the engine, and sped away into the night, leaving a trail of speculation in his wake. Those who saw him would later describe him as a black male with a stocky build. Some 7 minutes before 7 p.m., Kesha's boyfriend made his way to her apartment, eager to see his beloved. But when he knocked on the door, there was no response. Frowning, he tried the doorknob, and to his surprise it turned easily in his hand. With a sense of foreboding, he pushed open the door and entered the apartment. Silence greeted him, and his voice echoed through the empty apartment as he called out for Kesha. But there was no response, and this was when his anxiety began to mount. With each passing moment, he searched the apartment, moving from room to room. It was in the bathroom that he found her, lying motionless in the bathtub, concealed beneath a pile of clothes. With a jolt of shock, he realized that something was very wrong. She wasn't moving, and as he leaned in closer, he could see that she wasn't breathing. He could also see blood and realized that she had been stabbed. He checked for a pulse, but there was none to be found. Kesha's boyfriend's heart raced as he realized the gravity of the situation. He knew he had to act fast if there was any hope of saving her, and so he raised an alarm. Within moments, concerned neighbors started streaming into the apartment, alerted by the commotion. The minutes that followed were a blur of chaos and confusion as multiple people frantically called the emergency line to report what had happened, seemed to stand still as they waited for help to arrive. At 7:13 p.m., the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department was informed of the incident and rushed to the apartment. They were joined by paramedics who arrived at the scene, but it was too late. Kesha was beyond saving. Her body was carefully removed from the apartment and taken for an autopsy. The moment detectives arrived at the crime scene, they knew they had their work cut out for them. They meticulously collected DNA evidence from the scene, which they stored away, knowing it could be the key to unlocking the mystery. They also began questioning anyone who might have seen or heard something, including Kesha's boyfriend. It was during one of these interrogations that they heard about the strange man in the red sedan who had been seen visiting Kesha's apartment from eyewitnesses who had seen him. The detectives couldn't shake the feeling that this man was involved in Kesha's death, but all they had was a vague description of the man's appearance. No one had been able to get a good look at him, and there was no surveillance footage in the area to help them identify him. But the detectives refused to give up. They combed the neighborhood, knocked on doors, and talked to anyone who might have information. They knew that every lead, no matter how small, could be the key to solving the case. The results of Kesha's autopsy were soon revealed, and the findings were nothing short of disturbing. The Clark County Coroner's Office, which conducted the autopsy, concluded that she was strangled to death in a brutal homicide. But that wasn't all. The autopsy also showed that Kesha had been assaulted, stabbed, and beaten. The news sent shockwaves through the community as people tried to come to terms with the brutality of the crime. The hunt for the perpetrator continued, with law enforcement leaving no stone unturned in their pursuit of justice for Kesha. As they worked tirelessly day and night to solve the case, the detectives couldn't help but wonder who the mysterious man was and what he knew about Kesha's untimely demise. Despite their relentless efforts, the case remained unsolved, leaving Kesha's family to mourn their loss and grapple with the question of who had taken her life so viciously. As time went on, the case went cold. After years of gathering dust, Kesha's unsolved case finally got a second chance when it was assigned to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Homicide Cold Case Unit. In August of 2022, the department decided to do a review of the case, bringing together some of the most experienced detectives to work on it. As the team began to sift through the details of the case, Detective Dan Long discovered a new lead that had previously been overlooked. He recognized a pattern that he had come across in some cases he had investigated back in 2005. Detective Dan had previously worked on a case that involved the murder of 3 unrelated young women on different occasions. The 3 women were murdered in a similar manner and their bodies had been left in the same way. A man by the name of Norman Flowers had been the culprit in all 3 cases, and he was currently serving 3 life sentences in prison. Norman's criminal history was a chilling and gruesome tale of terror. During the first few months of 2005, he embarked on a spree of burglaries that turned into violent attacks. His first known victim was 18-year-old Sheila Quarles, the daughter of his ex-girlfriend Deborah Quarles. Norman had spent a total of 10 years in prison and had been paroled twice. It only took him about 20 days after his last release to murder Sheila. On March 24, 2005, he barged into Sheila's apartment and viciously assaulted her in the bathroom. He brutally beat and then strangled her to death. To add insult to injury, he left her body face up in the tub, which was filled with scorching hot water. Before fleeing the scene, he took her cell phone, bank card, and jewelry. In the weeks that followed, Norman played the role of the supportive ex-boyfriend, even going so far as to recommend counseling to the bereaved Deborah. Little did she know, the monster responsible for her daughter's murder was right under her nose. On May 4, 2005, more than a month after the incident, Norman struck again. This time around, he targeted not 1, but 2 women in the space of just 8 hours. First, he broke into the apartment of Marilee Coote, a 45-year-old woman who had the misfortune of crossing paths with a depraved criminal. Norman bludgeoned, assaulted, and ultimately strangled her to death. But he was not done yet. As the night wore on, he descended on another apartment belonging to the 25-year-old Rena Gonzalez. Like Marilee before her, Rena was no match for the viciousness of Norman's attack. She was assaulted and strangled with a telephone cord. Norman was interviewed by the police a few days later, but he denied any involvement in the gruesome murders. His lies, however, were no match for the power of forensic evidence. With the help of DNA that was found on Marilee's body, detectives were able to catch him. On June 6, 2005, His reign of terror came to an end and he was arrested and charged with the murder of Marilee. The evidence against Norman was overwhelming and the authorities were also able to link him to the murders of Sheila and Rena. In 2008, Norman went to trial for the murder of Sheila. Prosecutors pushed for the death penalty against him, but Norman's family members pleaded with the jurors to spare his life. They testified that Norman had suffered physical and sexual abuse as a child, which had left him traumatized and unstable. Despite his family's testimony, the jurors found Norman guilty and sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In August 2011, he received 2 more life sentences. For the murders of Marilee and Rena, Detective Dan's heart raced as he pored over the details of Norman's grisly crimes. He felt deep down that Kesha's unsolved murder was somehow connected to this man. He knew that he needed concrete evidence to make an arrest, and DNA testing was the only way to confirm his suspicions. With a sense of urgency, Detective Dan quickly packaged up the evidence from Kesha's case and sent it off to the DNA lab. He couldn't wait to get the results back. The thought of finally bringing closure to Kesha's family after all these years drove him forward. It's not been disclosed which pieces of evidence were sent for testing. The days turned into weeks and Detective Dan and the rest of his team grew increasingly restless. They knew finding Kesha's killer was crucial, not just for justice but for their own peace of mind. Finally, on December 21, 2002, the call they had been waiting for came in. The results were in and they were conclusive. The evidence from Kesha's case was a match for Norman's DNA. After years of searching, they had finally caught their man, and they could hardly believe that he had been right under their noses all the while. With the available evidence, it also became clear that Kesha had been Norman's first victim. After this, the detectives began to formulate a plan to bring Norman to justice for the murder. They didn't have to look for him since he was locked up at the High Desert State Prison in Nevada where he was serving his 3 life sentences. On February 23, 2023, the detectives secured an arrest warrant for Norman. The charges were severe and this included open murder with a deadly weapon, sexual assault with a deadly weapon, and burglary with a deadly weapon. The detectives were determined to make sure that Norman paid for his crimes against Kesha, no matter where he was. As the news of Norman's arrest spread, a police briefing was held on the same day. Kesha's family was invited to attend and her daughter Kalia arrived with a heavy heart, visibly shaken and emotional. With tears streaming down her face, she expressed gratitude towards the police force for providing her with a sense of closure. Kesha's murder is a tragic reminder of the dangers that can lurk in our communities. Despite the devastating loss, Detective Dan and his team's unwavering dedication to finding justice brought some measure of comfort to Kesha's loved ones. But the case also raises questions about the failings of our justice system in the need for better prevention and rehabilitation programs to prevent such tragedies from happening in the first place. The case of Eric Richens. Eric Richens was born on May 13, 1982, and left a lasting impact on those around him. As a child, Eric was passionate about sports, actively participating in basketball, baseball, and soccer, which showcased his athletic talent and enthusiasm for staying active. Eric's true passion, however, was anything that involved being outdoors. He was an exceptional hunter, known for his impressive marksmanship, and had amassed an impressive collection of trophy animals from around the world. With his vibrant personality, Eric had the ability to light up any room he entered, spreading joy and laughter through his storytelling, playful pranks, and contagious laughter. As an adventure seeker, Eric lived life to the fullest in Utah, where he owned a wide range of motorized vehicles, including trucks, four-wheelers, and snowmobiles. He loved exploring the outdoors and relishing the thrill of adventure. Despite his love for fun and adventure, Eric was deeply committed to his faith, being a devoted member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Eric's family supported him on a 2-year mission trip to Mexico City, where he became fluent in Spanish. After high school, he attended the University of Utah, earning a degree in international studies with a minor in Spanish in 2009. While working in construction, Eric frequently visited Home Depot, where he met Curry Darden. Over time, they developed a friendly connection, and Eric found himself attracted to her charming personality and beauty. However, he was too shy to approach her directly, so Eric asked a friend to help him get her phone number. One day, while Eric was shopping at Home Depot, his friend discreetly asked Curry for her number, telling her that Eric was interested in getting to know her better. Eric anxiously waited to see if his plan would work. Eric took the next step and called Curry to set up their first in-person meeting, unaware that it would be a life-changing event. As soon as they met, they clicked, and their first date marked the start of a romantic journey. As they introduced each other to their families, their bond grew stronger. Curry's family welcomed Eric with open arms, and Eric's family was equally impressed by Curry's character and how well she fit with him. Although Eric's sisters, Katie and Amy, were initially cautious, they soon warmed up to Curry and accepted her into their family. In 2013, Eric and Curry got married in an intimate ceremony, making their relationship official. After their wedding, Curry gave birth to their first child, Carter, followed by Ashton and then Weston, completing their ideal family. Eric naturally took to being a father, and his boys looked up to him. Eric took great pride in his sons' accomplishments, whether they excelled academically, athletically, or artistically. He consistently showed his support by attending their events and celebrating their successes. Later, Eric established a successful stone masonry business, which flourished due to his exceptional craftsmanship and attention to detail. Clients sought him out for his expertise in creating beautiful stonework. The business provided Eric and his family with financial security. Additionally, Curry, who worked in real estate, contributed to the family's income. Her entrepreneurial spirit, coupled with her knowledge of the local market, made her a valuable asset. She would buy homes, renovate them, and sell them for a profit. The Richens family enjoyed a wealthy lifestyle, symbolizing the epitome of success. However, their seemingly perfect life came to a sudden end on March 4, 2020, when Curry called 911 to report that her husband Eric was unresponsive. When paramedics arrived, they determined that Eric had already passed away. Devastated, Curry called her mother Lisa, who rushed to be by her side. Curry's brothers, DJ and Ronnie, were present too, overcome with tears and shock. The three of them struggled to come to terms with Eric's passing. Curry recounted that the evening had begun on a happy note as they celebrated her latest real estate business milestone, the purchase of a luxurious mansion. Before retiring to bed, Curry had even prepared Eric's favorite drink, a Moscow Mule, mixing ginger beer with vodka. Curry went to bed around 9 p.m., but ended up sleeping in her 9-year-old son's room because he was having nightmares. Later, around 3 a.m., she returned to the bedroom she shared with Eric. When she touched him, she was alarmed to find him ice-cold and unresponsive. Despite trying to wake him, she couldn't rouse him and knew something was seriously wrong. As she waited for the paramedics to arrive, Curry remembered the dispatcher's instructions to perform CPR on Eric, which she claimed to have followed. The paramedics were baffled by Eric's cause of death, speculating that it might have been an aneurysm, given his apparent good health and lack of known medical conditions. However, further investigation revealed that Eric had complained to Curry about chest pains the night before his death, which initially reinforced the aneurysm theory. But the autopsy results were shocking. Eric's cause of death was ultimately determined to be a lethal dose of fentanyl. Fentanyl is a highly potent pain medication that can be extremely dangerous and even deadly when taken in excessive amounts. After Eric's death, a critical question remained. How did this substance end up in his system? From the start, Curry and her family quickly blamed Eric's recreational drug use as the reason fentanyl was present. Curry explained that Eric would take a THC-infused gummy every night to relax, as he preferred THC, the psychoactive ingredient in cannabis, to unwind. However, Curry, her mother, and brothers had concerns about the origin of these gummies, suspecting that Eric didn't always buy them from trustworthy sources, and instead purchased them illegally. Eric's family strongly disagreed with these claims, believing there was more to the story, and urged investigators to explore other possibilities. Despite trying to move on, Curry faced significant challenges. According to her brother Ronnie, as the absence of their husband and father left a huge gap in their lives, leading their 3 sons to act out due to the uncertainty surrounding his death. Curry, grieving and seeking comfort for her children, turned to a creative outlet to cope with her emotions. She wrote and self-published a children's book on Amazon titled Are You With Me?, which aimed to help kids understand and deal with the loss of a loved one. The book tells the story of a young boy struggling to come to terms with his father's death through illustrations and narrative. In the book, Curry portrayed Eric, her late husband, as a protective angel always watching over their son. Her mother Lisa praised the book, saying it brought some comfort to Curry and her grandchildren as they navigated their emotions and rebuilt their lives. However, detectives investigating Eric's death soon uncovered evidence suggesting foul play. Just weeks after Curry appeared on local Utah news stations promoting her book and sharing her grief, she was arrested and charged with her husband's murder on May 8, 2023. The community was stunned by the arrest, and the tragic turn of events transformed what was initially a heartwarming story of a grieving wife and mother into an unbelievable tale of betrayal and tragedy. Curry is accused of murdering Eric by poisoning him. Eric's family believes Curry deliberately put a lethal dose of fentanyl in the Moscow Mule she made for him on the night he died. However, Curry's lawyer claims that no fentanyl was found in the glasses at their home. Curry denies any involvement in Eric's death, saying she had no reason to harm him. Her mother, Lisa, was shocked to hear about her daughter's alleged involvement and told investigators that the couple was happy and had no reason to kill each other. But as detectives dug deeper, they found that Curry and Eric's relationship was not as perfect as they seemed. The couple had disagreements, and Curry, who had given up her career to be a stay-at-home mom, wanted to be independent. She was also growing increasingly frustrated with Eric's frequent hunting trips. According to Lisa, Eric was unfaithful in his marriage, and he confided in her about the affair, along with Curry. To address their marital issues, Eric and Curry sought counseling. However, Eric's family denies that he ever cheated on her. Eric genuinely loved his sons and wanted to save the marriage. Despite his efforts, Eric was preparing for a potential divorce. He set up a secret trust with his sister Katie without revealing his intentions. The investigation uncovered that Eric had 6 life insurance policies worth $3 million. Furthermore, Curry forged Eric's signature on an additional $100,000 policy just 2 months before his death. It was also discovered that Curry allegedly stole money from Eric's personal accounts and misused business funds over several years. Contrary to her claims, Curry's house flipping business was failing, according to Eric's family representative. Curry's company was deeply in debt, with millions of dollars owed. According to the spokesperson, Curry urgently needed cash, and a prenuptial agreement signed before the marriage stated that she would not inherit the business assets if they were to divorce. However, if Eric were to pass away before her during their marriage, the assets would transfer to Curry. The spokesperson's claims were disputed by Curry's attorney, who maintained that the business was not in financial trouble. The attorney explained that the debt was a normal part of the house flipping business, as it relied on lines of credit that would be repaid once the properties were sold. Curry's attorney clarified that the large debt figure mentioned was simply a result of regular business transactions. Curry's mother, Lisa, recalled that Eric had been supportive of Curry's business ventures, particularly when they bought the mansion where they were celebrating on the night his death. In Heber Valley, Utah, a 10-acre estate with a mansion sat vacant since its construction in 2017, despite being close to popular ski resorts and Deer Creek Reservoir. This prime location offered endless opportunities for outdoor recreation. Curry, with the help of investors, bought the mansion with plans to renovate and transform it into a recreational hub. Her goal was to sell the property at a significant profit. After consulting an accountant, Curry and Eric discovered that they could potentially make a $12 million profit from the sale of the property, a substantial return on the initial $3 million investment. However, there's a discrepancy in Eric's involvement. While he seems to be on board with the purchase, his family claims he was against it and had a heated argument with Curry about buying the mansion. Eric's family spokesperson claims that Curry gave Eric a drink containing fentanyl on the night of his death, and they believe this was not Curry's first attempt to harm Eric. They allege that in 2019, during a trip to Greece, Eric became violently ill after Curry gave him a drink. But Curry's brother Ronnie denies this, saying Eric was mistakenly given an alcoholic drink by a bartender while taking antibiotics. Eric's family also claims that Curry tried to kill Eric again on Valentine's Day 2022, a month before his death, when she brought him a sandwich that caused him to break out in hives and struggle to breathe. After Eric's death, Curry's behavior was questioned, including an incident where she allegedly attacked her sister Amy when she tried to open a safe containing a large amount of cash. Curry claimed she was defending herself to retrieve important documents, but was charged with assault and pleaded no contest in June 2023. Curry appeared in court for a 4-hour bail hearing, during which her attorney tried to convince the judge to release her on bail. Prosecutors presented 3 witnesses and evidence to argue that Curry had poisoned her husband. One of the witnesses, a cell phone expert, testified about Google searches found on Curry's phone, including queries about retrieving deleted iPhone messages, FBI's ability to find deleted messages, and the lethal dose of fentanyl. However, Curry's attorney countered that these searches were conducted after her husband's death, as Curry sought answers to the accusations against her. The prosecution also questioned the lead detective about potential sources Curry might have used to obtain the drugs that killed Eric. According to the detective, a woman named Carmen Labber, who claimed to work as a cleaner for Curry's business and home, told investigators about a meeting that took place in early 2022. During a call, Curry asked Carmen to buy fentanyl pills for an investor with a back injury. Carmen, who had a history of drug-related crimes and was on probation, agreed to the request. She later told detectives that she purchased 15 to 30 fentanyl pills and met with Curry to exchange them for cash. This exchange happened on February 11, 2022, just 3 days before Valentine's Day. Around the same time court documents suggest Curry tried to poison Eric with a sandwich. Carmen also told detectives that Curry contacted her again, looking for even stronger drugs. She said Curry paid her with a check this time. Specifically, Carmen claimed that Curry wrote her a check for $1,300 about a week after Eric's death. However, Curry's attorney questioned whether the check could have been payment for cleaning services instead, and the detective acknowledged that this was possible. Curry's lawyer tried to discredit Carmen by pointing out her criminal history, including 4 first-degree felonies, and suggesting that she might not be a trustworthy witness. The lawyer claimed that Carmen may have been coerced into saying she sold drugs to avoid a long prison sentence, as the detective allegedly told her she would face serious consequences if she didn't cooperate. The lawyer also asked if there was any physical evidence to prove Carmen had bought drugs. The detective admitted that they found no text messages showing Curry asking Carmen for drugs, and no witnesses came forward to confirm they had seen the exchange. At the bail hearing, Eric's sister spoke to the judge, expressing her family's distress over Eric's death, and their fear that if Curry was released on bail, he would cause them further pain. Eric's sister asked the judge to Curry in custody, and the judge accepted her request. Meanwhile, Curry's family was upset because Curry was not allowed to leave jail before her trial and would have to stay there. They believed that Curry's time in jail was affecting her mental and physical health. In 2023, something serious happened to Curry while she was taking medicine given to her by jail officials. She had a seizure and was quickly taken to the hospital from the jail. While Curry was in jail, she claimed that the officials gave her the wrong medication, which caused her to experience adverse effects. Fortunately, she recovered after being treated at a hospital. During her hospital stay, jail officials found a handwritten, unsent letter in her cell. They filed it into court records, claiming it was a note from Curry to her mother. Prosecutors argued that this letter provided additional evidence of Curry's intentions and motivations. In November 2023, they requested a no-contact order to restrict Curry's access to her mother and brothers, mainly due to the letter. Prosecutors claimed that the letter was evidence of witness tampering. According to prosecutors, the letter instructed Curry's mother on how her brother Ronnie should testify in court. Specifically, Curry allegedly wanted Ronnie to claim that Eric had admitted to obtaining pain pills containing fentanyl from Mexico during his trip abroad. The letter also instructed Ronnie to obtain text messages from Eric discussing his drug use. Curry stressed the need to link Eric's Mexico activities to his alleged drug involvement. Despite this, she vehemently denied accusations that a letter was an attempt to tamper with witnesses, claiming it was a work of fiction she wrote as a fantasy story. The judge ruled in her favor, as the prosecution failed to prove witness tampering. Currently, Curry and Eric's family are fighting for custody of their 3 sons, who are living with one of Eric's relatives. Although Curry is in jail, she still gets to see her sons through twice-weekly video calls. While her family has not been allowed private visits with the children, they regularly attend their sports events and practices, which are open to the public. If convicted of poisoning her husband Eric with fentanyl, Curry faces a sentence of 25 years to life. Multiple civil lawsuits have been filed against Curry, all related to Eric's estate. A central issue in these cases is the custody of Eric's children. Eric's family thinks that Curry's family is motivated by a desire to control Eric's assets, as whoever gets custody of the children will also gain control of his money. Curry's trial is scheduled to start in 2025. On a cold winter morning on January 2, 1983, 28-year-old Nancy McEvers, née Pepper, died in her home in the Durham neighborhood of Washington County in Oregon. No foul play was suspected, and it was believed she took her own life. The case went cold as it was believed to be a suicide, and the family tried making their peace with Nancy's death. After 40 years, new evidence came into light that changed the entire course of the case. The mystery of Nancy McEvers' case finally reached its conclusion in 2023. What had happened to Nancy that day? What new evidence led police to find the answers after 4 decades? Welcome back to Mysterious Hook, where we shed light on under-the-radar cases across the country. Today, we are looking at the 40-year-old cold case of Nancy McEvers that has finally received closure in 2023. Washington County makes up the Portland metropolitan area and is the second most populous county in Oregon, which has 36 total counties. Away from the bustling cities, the breathtaking scenery and the lush greenery that surrounds the area is one of the main reasons why people find comfort in the Washington County of Oregon and like to settle here. The hills and mountains that envelop the majestic landscape, friendly people, and the old-fashioned homes are the charm of this region. Home to about 600,000 people, it is the most populous Washington County in America. With a culturally vibrant community and a myriad of options for recreational activities like hiking, nature walking, and fishing, it offers a haven for people seeking to get away from the rush of daily life. But sadly, it also holds dark secrets, and it is here that our case takes place today. Nancy McEvers, née Pepper, was born in Oregon in 1955. Nancy's mother, Lenore Pepper, now 97, was used to hearing the words sweet and beautiful when people spoke about her daughter. Everyone, whether they knew her for years or had just met her, referred to her as a friendly person. Nancy was close to both of her sisters. Being the middle child, she was loved by both her elder sister, Janet Iglesias, and her younger sister, Diane Grill. She often acted as a mediator between her mother and the sisters. Her loving and caring nature, coupled with her outgoing personality, was why people loved interacting and spending time with her. She had always been the caring one among her sisters, and her maternal instincts were really strong. So when she got married to Randy McEvers and had a son, she really enjoyed being a mom. It was one thing that everyone knew about her. She loved being a mom. Nancy's love towards her own child and for her sisters carried the sisters' dreams forward. All the 3 sisters had planned on raising their kids together. Coincidentally, the 3 sisters had their first children within 18 months of each other. The plan of giving them a happy and close-knit upbringing was already in the works. But in a tragic twist, it was to be left incomplete in the end. January 2nd, 1983 was a cold winter's morning in beautiful Washington County in Oregon. Around 10:38 a.m., police received a call from Randall McEvers. Randall seemed to be distraught that his wife had taken her own life. Washington County Sheriff's Office deputies reached the 17300 block of Southwest Rivendell Drive located in the Durham neighborhood, which was not a part of Washington County then, but was incorporated into it after 1983. The police officers, assisted by the Oregon State Police Medical Examiner's Office, Oregon State Police Crime Lab, and Washington County Medical Examiner's Office found the body of Nancy McKevers, née Pepper, with a gunshot wound to the head. Despite the nature of the wound and very low chances of Nancy making it out alive, paramedics rushed to get Nancy to a nearby hospital. She was almost immediately pronounced dead. On the surface, the death of Nancy McKevers checked out as a suicide case. Investigators found and seized a Smith & Wesson revolver from the crime scene. It was only when the police started interrogating people that inconsistencies started showing up. When the alleged suicide had happened, it was just Nancy who had been home with her 30-year-old husband and 1-year-old son. The crime scene made the detectives ask the question whether the suicide happened in a closed space or if Randall was a witness to it. The interrogation that followed raised the red alarms. The police had to wait for forensic reports to take the investigation forward. When they got the reports back, the case of Nancy McKevers, née Pepper, turned out to be a lot more complex than the police had anticipated. Following the autopsy report, forensic tests, and ballistic tests, it did not take long for investigators to understand that there was something else at play here. The medical reports by the Oregon State Police Crime Lab soon revealed that the case could not have been a suicide. There were way too many things that were off. A person who has recently fired a gun would have residue on their hands and clothes, which is tested by lifting samples and processing them to check for fused particles of lead, antimony, or barium. The first inconsistency was that Nancy had no gunshot residue on her hands, but it did not prove anything directly. This is because the residue can only be detected within 6 to 8 hours of the shot being fired, and it can easily be washed away from being in contact with other things. So while it was an important discovery, it was not enough. The second inconsistency arose when the medical examiners reported that Nancy's wound was too broad for it to be a suicide case. The wider the wound, the greater the distance of the gun's muzzle from the person. Further, it was also mentioned in the report that the charred particles on her clothes meant that Nancy was struggling or trying to defend herself. Nancy had been home alone with her husband Randall and her 1-year-old child. Randall had not mentioned the presence of any other person or instances of forced entry, so naturally the police had found their prime suspect. Detectives initiated their interrogation with Randall. After giving them basic details, he went on to confess that Nancy and him were struggling over the gun, and during that chaos, he didn't remember who had pulled the trigger. When the police prodded more and asked the questions again, Randall retracted his statement, changed the story, and presented a new version to the officers. He told police that he had just entered the room when Nancy was pulling the trigger. There was no struggle possible, as she had already shot herself by the time Randall walked into the room and realized what was happening. Both these versions were exactly opposite to one another. It was important to find out what had really happened. So the detectives approached the people who were close to Nancy, including her relatives, friends, and coworkers. Every one of them suspected Randall to have some kind of involvement in her death. The police had just wanted a little more evidence to finally make a sense of the situation and build a strong case against Nancy's husband. So the police called in Randall for questioning again 2 days after the initial interrogation. They could not get a confession out of him. Randall's parents then showed up at the police station and assured them that their son was ready to go through a polygraph test to highlight his innocence. But Randall was a no-show for the scheduled test. By April, he had entirely stopped cooperating with the police. Without any other leads and new evidence, the police marked the case of Nancy McKevers' alleged suicide as cold. A week after Nancy's funeral, her family members were informed that no foul play suspicions had led anywhere, and there were no further leads in the case. So the family tried their best to put this dark chapter behind them. After her death in 1983, not only was her son deprived of all the love that Nancy had to give, but also her entire family changed forever. They were deeply affected by the news. Nancy was such a huge part of their lives that they were never the same after she was gone from their lives. When Nancy's family found out about her death, they could not believe it. She was a cheerful and easygoing person who loved every bit of raising her child. To think that Nancy shot herself dead with her son still in the house was unbelievable to her family. She would never have done anything like this, which would separate herself from her son in such a final manner. Lenore Pepper, Nancy's mother, had her doubts about Nancy's death. She suspected Randall but could not say anything about it. She had already lost her daughter, and after the police officially told them that there was no foul play suspected, Lenore Pepper let her suspicions die. With no charges against him, Randall was responsible for raising his 1-year-old son. Lenore did not want to stir up something she did not know how to handle. She had strong doubts about Randall but stayed silent to protect her grandson just in case her confusions and questions turned out to be false. Not just Nancy's mother, but everyone who knew Nancy thought that it could not have been a suicide. But without any confirmation from the investigators, their doubts remained doubts. Nancy's sister believed that it was a terrible accident that was never meant to happen. She was just 28 when she died. Her dreams, her aspirations, and her entire life disappeared in a second. The case of Nancy McEvers had been closed for so long that no one expected it to be reopened by the detectives in August 2022. The officers assigned to the Violent Crimes Unit were in charge of the cold case investigations. When they went through the file of Nancy McEvers, they knew that justice had to be served. The world did not even know that Nancy hadn't committed suicide. She was murdered in cold blood. Before moving forward, the police went over the previously collected evidence. Detective Anil Cherik, part of the investigation team, called the case poorly investigated. The police work of the officers in the 80s was not thorough. And since the detective in charge from 1983 had already passed away, there was no way of knowing why the officers let this case go cold for so many years. The evidence taken in 1983 was retested by the Washington County Sheriff's Office Forensic Science Unit, and the forensic report came out to be exactly as similar to the previous one. The possibility of Nancy's death being a suicide was completely ruled out. The police now believed that this case had an angle of domestic violence that resulted in the death of Nancy McEvers. Investigators did not release a description in the media detailing which new leads were explored due to concern for the family's privacy. The police carried out interviews with around 20 people, some of whom were deputies, detectives, firefighters, and family members who were either present at the scene in 1983 or were closely involved in the case. Even after 40 years, Nancy's story was alive. It became evident as additional evidence came to light after all these years. Nancy's file mentioned that when the police were interviewing people who knew Nancy and Randall, they revealed that he had been planning to kill Nancy because she wanted to get a divorce and leave him. Anil Cherik, one of the investigators on the case, showed his confusion about no action being taken in the 80s despite direct evidence. He said, "Why they did the things they did, I can't tell you." But finally, everything was falling in place and Randall was slowly but surely turning out to be the prime suspect in the murder of Nancy McEvers. At this time, Randy was living in Tigard, a city in Oregon, 10 miles south of Portland. The police approached him at his house in January 2023 and questioned him about the incident. He told the detectives that he had gone through hypnotherapy to make him forget everything related to that day. The police by now had enough leads and they wanted Nancy's family to receive real closure. So after their interview with Randall, they referred the case to the district attorney's office in Washington County for their review. The information that Nancy's family had been living with for 40 years turned out to be false. While there had been enough twists in the case of Nancy McEvers till this point, police were shocked to find out that Randall had taken his own life on February 8, 2023. He also wrote a note in which he denied any responsibility for Nancy's death. Although the DA's office could not review the case after Randall's death, the police believed that this was a closure in itself. After the death of their prime suspect, Nancy McEvers' case is now finally closed. It came as a shock when the police reached out to Lenore in August 2022. She could not believe that her suspicions about her daughter's death had been true all along. Nancy's mother Lenore showed her gratitude to the police officers for being able to see it through to the end. She wished Nancy's father had been alive to finally witness their daughter's story get in closure. Getting to know about Randall's suicide, Lenore Pepper said, "I feel like we got justice, but like I said, in a very strange way. But at my age, I don't know if I could have gone to a trial every day, so we have to accept that. That's all we can do." Nancy was loved by all, so the news of her vicious murder stirred multiple emotions. Her sisters stated that they felt every emotion all over again. But the entire family believed that Randall's suicide was as much evidence as his actual trial in court. He denied having any involvement in Nancy's death. But his own death turned out to be an acceptance that Nancy's family had been waiting for 4 decades. "We're exempt from going through a trial and being drugged," said Nancy's younger sister Diane Grill. "It was hard. It's been tough for 40 years. As my sister said, we've got the answers now because we need to finish it." Nancy's family is sharing the news with more of her loved ones, and they are planning to conduct a memorial service for her. After the shock of learning that their beloved Nancy had been murdered after 40 years, they have developed new grief and trauma. Nonetheless, the entire family was grateful to the investigation team who served justice to her. For 40 years, Nancy's family believed that she had ended her own life. Little did they know that their initial doubts about her death were all valid and led directly to the answer that Nancy's husband had killed her. Although the case has been closed now, Washington County Sheriff's Office deputies are still open for more information on Nancy McKeever's death. They want anyone with new and relevant information to step forward and call detectives at 503-846-2700 to serve justice to Nancy, who was believed to be dead by choice for all these years. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.